The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where Catherine sat with her hands folded in her lap. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. William had left early for a private meeting with his father, and the silence in their quarters felt heavier than usual. Down the corridor, William stood outside King Charles's study, his hand hovering over the ornate door handle. He had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his mind, but now that the moment had arrived, every word seemed to evaporate. The weight of what he was about to discuss would alter the course of their lives forever. 3 weeks earlier, Catherine had received news that would shake any family to its core. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind with crystal clarity. The cancer has returned, and this time, it's more aggressive. She had sat in the sterile hospital room, watching Dr. Harrison's lips move while her world crumbled around her. The first round of treatment had been successful, or so they thought. The past 2 years of recovery had given them hope, allowed them to believe they could return to normal life. That evening, she had waited until their children were asleep before telling William. They sat in their private sitting room at Kensington Palace, the fire crackling softly as she found the courage to speak. William's face had gone pale, then determined, then heartbroken in the span of seconds. He had pulled her close, and they sat in silence for what felt like hours. The decision to step back from royal duties hadn't been made lightly. Catherine understood the weight of responsibility that came with their roles, the expectations of the public, and the traditions they were meant to uphold. But she also knew that this battle required every ounce of her strength, and she couldn't fight it while maintaining the demanding schedule of royal engagements. William had been adamant from the beginning. "We face this together," he had said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Everything else can wait." But Catherine knew the guilt he carried about stepping away from his duties. She had seen him staring out the window during quiet moments, lost in thought about the commitments they would have to break, the people they would disappoint. The children had been told with careful consideration. George, at 11, understood more than they wished he had to. Charlotte, 9, had asked thoughtful questions that broke Catherine's heart with their innocence. Louis, only 6, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere but couldn't quite grasp why his parents seemed so serious all the time. Catherine had insisted they maintain as much normalcy as possible for the children. School routines continued, playdates were arranged, and bedtime stories were read with the same enthusiasm as always. But she noticed the way George watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, searching her face for signs of the illness that had stolen their previous sense of security. The palace staff had been sworn to secrecy while they figured out how to handle the situation publicly. Catherine's private secretary, Amanda, had been working tirelessly to reschedule engagements and find appropriate explanations that wouldn't cause undue concern. The official statement would need to be carefully crafted to convey the seriousness of the situation while maintaining the privacy the family desperately needed. Catherine thought about all the projects she would have to pause. The early childhood development initiative that had been her passion for years would need new leadership. The photography exhibitions she had been planning would have to wait. Most heartbreaking of all, the school visits that brought her such joy would be indefinitely postponed. She had always found energy in meeting young people, hearing their stories, and seeing their potential. Now, her own future felt uncertain. William's relationship with the press had always been complicated, but this situation brought new challenges. He knew they would be watching for any signs of change, any hint about what was happening behind palace walls. The delicate balance between transparency and privacy had never felt more critical. Too much information could overwhelm their family with unwanted attention, but too little could fuel dangerous speculation. The couple had discussed moving to their Norfolk home full-time during treatment. Anmer Hall offered the privacy and peace that London couldn't provide. The children could attend local schools, and Catherine could focus entirely on her health without the constant pressure of being in the public eye. But even this decision felt loaded with meaning about how long the treatment might take and what the outcome might be. Catherine's mother, Carol, had been a steady source of strength during these difficult weeks. She arrived each morning with fresh flowers and homemade meals, understanding without words what her daughter needed most. The practical support was invaluable, but more than that, her presence provided a sense of continuity and comfort that Catherine clung to during the darkest moments. The medical team had outlined an aggressive treatment plan that would require Catherine's complete focus and energy. The oncologist had been honest about the challenges ahead while remaining optimistic about the possibilities. New treatments had emerged since her first diagnosis, offering hope that hadn't existed before. But the journey would be long and difficult, requiring multiple hospital stays and weeks of recovery. William had already begun the process of transferring his immediate responsibilities to other family members. His private secretary had been working closely with Buckingham Palace to ensure continuity in his patronages and commitments. The transition needed to appear seamless to the public while giving William the flexibility to be present for every appointment, every difficult day, and every small victory in Catherine's treatment. The quiet moments had become precious to them both. Evening walks in the private gardens, reading together while the children did homework, and simple conversations about everyday things provided anchors of normalcy. They had learned during Catherine's first diagnosis that these ordinary moments were actually extraordinary gifts that shouldn't be taken for granted. Catherine found herself paying attention to details she had previously overlooked. The way morning light fell across William's face while he read briefing papers, the sound of Charlotte practicing piano in the music room, the feeling of Louis's small hand in hers as they walked to the stables. These sensory memories felt important to preserve, though she couldn't explain exactly why. The decision about how much to share with the extended royal family had been another difficult conversation. Some members needed to know immediately because of the impact on their own schedules and responsibilities. Others could be informed gradually as plans became more concrete. Catherine wanted to maintain control over her own narrative as much as possible, even within the family structure that sometimes felt overwhelming. Sleep had become elusive for both of them. William often woke to find Catherine standing at the window, looking out at the gardens in the pre-dawn darkness. She would tell him she was thinking about the future, about what she wanted to accomplish once she was healthy again, about the places she wanted to take the children. But he could see the fear in her eyes that she couldn't quite voice. The medical appointments had become a routine that William insisted on sharing completely. He took notes during consultations, asked questions when Catherine felt too overwhelmed to speak, and provided the emotional support that allowed her to focus on absorbing information. The doctors had quickly learned to address them both as equal partners in the treatment decisions. Catherine's relationship with her public role had evolved significantly since becoming the Princess of Wales. The responsibility felt heavier now, knowing that her choices affected not just her immediate family, but also the institution she had married into and the people who looked to her for inspiration. Stepping away, even temporarily, felt like abandoning people who had supported her through previous challenges. The children's schools had been discreetly informed about the situation, ensuring that teachers would be alert to any changes in behavior or academic performance. Catherine and William wanted the children to feel supported in every environment, even if they couldn't always be physically present themselves. The school counselors had experience with high-profile families facing health crises and knew how to provide appropriate support. Planning for various scenarios had become a necessary but emotionally draining exercise. Best-case outcomes, worst-case possibilities, and everything in between needed contingency plans. Catherine approached this with the same methodical thoroughness she brought to her royal duties, but William struggled with discussing possibilities that felt too frightening to contemplate. The physical symptoms had been manageable so far, but Catherine knew they would intensify as treatment progressed. She had started preparing the children for changes they might notice, explaining in age-appropriate terms that medicine sometimes made people feel tired or look different temporarily. Charlotte had immediately offered to help with anything her mother needed, while George had retreated into himself, processing the information in his own quiet way. Catherine's faith had always been an important source of strength, but now it felt essential for survival. Private prayers in the palace chapel provided moments of peace when everything else felt chaotic and uncertain. She found comfort in the continuity of traditions that had sustained the royal family through previous crises, even as she faced challenges that felt entirely unique to her own experience. The weight of keeping their situation private while maintaining public appearances had been exhausting for both of them. Every smile for photographers felt forced. Every public engagement required enormous emotional energy they didn't have to spare. Catherine had become an expert at projecting strength and composure while fighting internal battles that felt overwhelming. William's protective instincts had intensified to a degree that sometimes felt suffocating, though Catherine understood his need to create barriers between her and any additional stress. He screened phone calls, managed visitor requests, and took on household responsibilities that had previously been shared. His love expressed itself through action, even when words felt inadequate. The couple had sought guidance from other families who had faced similar challenges, learning practical strategies for maintaining family unity during health crises. The conversations had been both helpful and heartbreaking, revealing the long-term impacts that extended far beyond the immediate medical concerns. Recovery affected entire family systems in ways that were impossible to predict or control completely. As Catherine sat in the morning silence, she thought about all the conversations yet to come. The public announcement would require careful coordination with multiple palace departments, medical professionals, and family members. The children would need ongoing support as the reality of their situation became more apparent. William would need space to process his own fears while remaining strong for everyone else. The sound of William's footsteps in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. She could tell from his pace that the conversation with his father had been difficult but necessary. They would face whatever came next together, just as they had promised each other years ago when their biggest concern had been learning royal protocol and managing public expectations. Their quiet goodbye to normal life had already begun, though the public wouldn't know for several more days. Catherine understood that everything was about to change again, but this time they were older, more experienced, and surrounded by people who had proven their loyalty through previous challenges. The path ahead remained uncertain, but they wouldn't walk it alone. The palace communications team had gathered in the secure briefing room at 7 in the morning, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation they were about to manage. Amanda, Catherine's private secretary, had spent the previous night crafting and recrafting the statement that would change everything. Every word had been weighed carefully, balancing honesty with privacy, hope with realism. William stood at the head of the polished oak table, his shoulders set with determination despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. He had barely slept since the decision to go public had been finalized. The weight of protecting his family while fulfilling his duty to inform the public had kept him awake, staring at the ceiling and running through worst-case scenarios. Catherine remained at Anmer Hall with the children, wanting to maintain their normal routine for as long as possible before the inevitable media storm. She had insisted on personally calling the headmasters of their schools before the announcement went live, ensuring that appropriate support would be in place immediately. The conversations had been difficult but necessary. each word carefully chosen to convey the seriousness of the situation without causing undue alarm. The strategy meeting included representatives from Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and the Government Communications Service. Everyone understood that this announcement would dominate news cycles for weeks and required coordination across multiple departments. The king had personally approved the approach, offering his full support while privately wrestling with his own fears about his daughter-in-law's diagnosis. Dr. Harrison had reviewed the medical portions of the statement, ensuring accuracy while maintaining appropriate confidentiality about specific details. The balance between public interest and medical privacy was delicate, requiring language that satisfied curiosity without compromising Catherine's right to keep certain information private. The oncology team had experience with high-profile patients and understood the unique challenges of managing treatment in the public eye. The timing had been calculated to minimize disruption to the children's school day. The statement would be released at 11 in the morning, after lessons had begun, but before lunch break when students typically checked their phones. Teachers had been briefed to monitor student reactions and provide support if needed, particularly for classmates who might be upset by the news. Catherine had recorded a brief video message the previous evening, wanting the public to hear directly from her about the situation. The filming had taken several attempts as she struggled to maintain composure while delivering words that felt surreal to speak aloud. William had been behind the camera, offering silent support and encouragement when the emotion threatened to overwhelm her. The video was simple and dignified, filmed in the garden at Anmer Hall with natural lighting that softened the gravity of her words. Catherine had chosen to wear a blue sweater that William had given her years earlier, finding comfort in the familiar fabric against her skin. Her voice was steady but warm, conveying both the seriousness of her condition and her determination to face the challenges ahead. Social media managers had prepared for the immediate response, knowing that speculation and conspiracy theories would emerge within hours of the announcement. Fact-checking resources were ready to deploy, and monitoring systems were in place to track the conversation and respond to misinformation quickly. The digital age meant that their private health crisis would become public discourse in ways that previous royal health issues had never experienced. The morning of the announcement, Catherine woke early to spend quiet time with each of her children before they left for school. She had already explained the basics of what would happen that day, but she wanted to reassure them one more time about the support systems in place. George had asked thoughtful questions about how their lives would change, while Charlotte had focused on practical concerns about upcoming school events and family plans. Louis, still young enough to not fully grasp the implications, had been most concerned about whether the family dogs would be upset by all the attention. Catherine had smiled at his priorities, reminded that children often focused on the details that adults overlooked. She promised that the pets would be fine and that their family routines would remain as normal as possible. The palace staff had been briefed about increased security measures that would take effect immediately after the announcement. The Norfolk estate would need enhanced protection, and travel protocols would be adjusted to accommodate Catherine's treatment schedule. Everyone understood that the coming months would require flexibility and discretion beyond their usual professional standards. International diplomatic contacts had been informed through appropriate channels, ensuring that foreign governments and royal families would hear the news through official sources rather than media reports. Catherine's work with various international charities meant that organizations around the world needed to be prepared for questions about her ongoing involvement and future commitments. At exactly 11 o'clock, the statement appeared simultaneously on all official royal social media accounts and was distributed to news organizations worldwide. The words seemed stark in black and white. The Princess of Wales has been diagnosed with cancer and will begin a course of preventative chemotherapy. The simplicity of the language belied the complexity of emotions behind the decision to share such personal information. William had returned to Anmer Hall immediately after the statement was released. wanting to be with Catherine when the public response began. They sat together in their living room, phones turned off, trying to maintain a bubble of normalcy even as they knew the world outside was reacting to their news. The irony wasn't lost on them that this most private moment of their lives was now the subject of international attention. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes, news websites around the world had the story as their lead headline. Television programs interrupted regular broadcasting to share the announcement and bring in medical experts to discuss cancer treatments and prognosis. Social media exploded with messages of support, concern, and, unfortunately, speculation about details that hadn't been shared. Downing Street issued a statement of support within an hour, followed by similar messages from Commonwealth governments and international leaders. The coordinated response demonstrated the global impact of the news and the level of concern for Catherine's well-being. But each official statement also added to the pressure the family felt about the public nature of their private crisis. The children returned from school to find their normally quiet home, surrounded by photographers and reporters maintained at a respectful distance by security personnel. Catherine and William had prepared them for this change, but seeing it in person was different from discussing it hypothetically. Charlotte immediately went to her mother for a hug, while George retreated to his room to process the new reality in his own way. Evening news programs dedicated significant time to the announcement, bringing in royal correspondents, medical experts, and commentators to analyze every aspect of the situation. Catherine watched some of the coverage from her bed, struck by how clinical and detached the discussions seemed when they were talking about her life and her family's future. Messages of support began arriving from around the world almost immediately. Fellow cancer survivors shared their stories and offered encouragement. Charities that Catherine had supported sent flowers and cards. World leaders sent private messages through diplomatic channels. The outpouring of kindness was touching, but also overwhelming in its scope and intensity. The palace telephone system was overwhelmed with calls from well-wishers, journalists, and organizations wanting to offer support or request information. A dedicated team had been assigned to manage the volume of communication, but the sheer number of responses exceeded all expectations. Every message required acknowledgement. Every inquiry needed appropriate response. Catherine's medical team had anticipated increased attention, but were still surprised by the number of requests for interviews and statements. Dr. Harrison's office was contacted by medical journals, television programs, and research organizations wanting to discuss the case or use it to raise awareness about cancer prevention. All requests were politely declined to maintain patient confidentiality. The children's schools implemented additional security measures immediately, understanding that student safety was paramount during this period of intense media interest. Teachers received updated guidelines about interacting with press and protocols for protecting student privacy. The goal was to maintain educational normalcy while acknowledging the changed circumstances. International cancer charities reported significant increases in website traffic and donation inquiries following the announcement. Catherine's diagnosis had inadvertently created a teaching moment about cancer awareness and the importance of early detection. Medical professionals used the opportunity to educate the public about symptoms and treatment options, turning personal tragedy into potential public benefit. The decision about which royal engagements to cancel and which family members would fill in required careful coordination. The Queen Consort immediately cleared her calendar to take on additional responsibilities, while other working royals adjusted their schedules to cover essential commitments. The machine of royal duty continued functioning even as one of its key members stepped back. Catherine's patronages needed individual attention and communication about her continued involvement during treatment. Some organizations required immediate leadership transitions, while others could wait for her recovery. Each relationship required personal consideration and respectful communication about changing circumstances and future possibilities. The financial markets responded to the news with characteristic unpredictability. Tourism stocks fluctuated as analysts tried to predict the impact on royal-related tourism. Fashion brands associated with Catherine saw various responses. The intersection of personal health and economic impact highlighted the unique position the royal family occupied in contemporary society. Mental health organizations noted the importance of the announcement in normalizing conversations about serious illness and family stress. Catherine's willingness to share her diagnosis publicly helped reduce stigma and encouraged others to seek support during health crises. The educational value of her openness became an unexpected benefit of an otherwise devastating situation. As the first day of public knowledge ended, Catherine and William sat together in their bedroom, processing the day's events and preparing for the challenges ahead. The quiet goodbye they had been saying to their normal life over recent weeks had now become a very public transition. Their private battle would now be fought in the full awareness of millions of people around the world. The next morning would bring the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one where every medical appointment, every good day and bad day, every step forward and setback would be of interest to the global public. The support was overwhelming and deeply appreciated, but the loss of privacy was irreversible. They faced the future knowing that their quiet goodbye had become the world's shared concern. 6 months had passed since the announcement that changed everything, and Catherine stood in the same garden where she had filmed her message to the public. The autumn light was softer now, casting golden shadows across the lawn where her children played with their dogs. The chemotherapy treatments were behind her. And while the path to full recovery stretched ahead, she felt stronger than she had in months. The journey had been more difficult than either she or William had anticipated. The physical toll of treatment was expected, but the emotional complexity of fighting cancer in the public eye had presented challenges they couldn't have prepared for. Every hospital visit became a coordinated effort involving security, medical staff, and communications teams working to balance her need for privacy with the public's concern for her well-being. William had never left her side during the hardest days. He had transformed from a working royal into a full-time caregiver, advocate, and protector. The role had changed him fundamentally, stripping away any remaining formality between his public persona and private self. His staff had watched him grow into a different kind of leader, one whose authority came from having faced genuine adversity rather than inherited position. The children had adapted with the resilience that only young people possess, but the experience had aged them in ways that broke Catherine's heart. George had become fiercely protective of family privacy, politely but firmly declining to discuss his mother's health with classmates or teachers. Charlotte had thrown herself into her studies and activities with renewed intensity, as if achievement could somehow protect their family from further uncertainty. Louis, still the youngest, had struggled most with the changes to family routine. The hospital visits confused him, and Catherine's fatigue during treatment had disrupted their usual bedtime rituals and weekend adventures. William had stepped in to fill these gaps, learning to braid Charlotte's hair and becoming an expert at Louis's favorite bedtime stories. The public response had evolved from initial shock and concern to a sustained outpouring of support that touched Catherine deeply. Letters arrived daily from cancer survivors sharing their stories, children sending drawings and well wishes, and families offering prayers and encouragement. The palace had hired additional staff just to manage the volume of correspondence and ensure that every message received appropriate acknowledgement. Dr. Harrison had become more than Catherine's oncologist. She had become a trusted advisor helping the family navigate the intersection of medical care and public life. Her experience with high-profile patients proved invaluable in managing treatment schedules around security requirements and finding ways to maintain confidentiality despite intense media interest. The medical team had worked seamlessly with palace staff to create protocols that prioritized patient care while respecting the unique circumstances of treating a member of the royal family. The relationship between Catherine and William had deepened in ways they couldn't have anticipated. The crisis had stripped away the layers of royal protocol and public expectation, leaving them to face each other as simply husband and wife confronting an uncertain future. Their conversations had become more honest, their priorities clearer, and their appreciation for ordinary moments more profound. Catherine's patronages had been maintained through careful delegation and strategic appearances during her stronger days. The organizations she supported had rallied around her, taking on additional responsibilities and finding ways to continue her work, even in her absence. The Early Childhood Development Initiative had actually grown stronger during her treatment, as other advocates stepped forward to fill leadership roles and expand programming. The media attention had eventually settled into a more respectful pattern, though Catherine knew that every public appearance would be scrutinized for signs of her recovery progress. She had learned to accept this reality while maintaining boundaries about what aspects of her health journey remained private. The balance required constant attention, but had become manageable through experience and strong communication strategies. International relationships had been strengthened through the crisis in unexpected ways. Foreign diplomats and their families had reached out with personal messages that went beyond official protocols. Catherine had received handwritten notes from first ladies and queens around the world, sharing their own experiences with health challenges and offering genuine friendship that transcended political boundaries. The experience had fundamentally changed Catherine's relationship with her royal role. The enforced pause in public duties had given her perspective on which activities truly mattered and which were performed simply out of tradition. She was determined to return to public life with more intentional focus on causes that aligned with her values and utilized her skills most effectively. William's transformation had been equally profound. The man who had once struggled with the weight of his future responsibilities had found clarity through crisis. His leadership style had evolved from dutiful compliance with royal expectations to authentic engagement based on personal conviction. Staff members noticed the change immediately upon his gradual return to official duties. The children's schools had been instrumental in maintaining normalcy during the most difficult months. Teachers had provided extra support without making the children feel different or singled out for attention. Their classmates had shown remarkable maturity and kindness, offering support while respecting privacy in ways that impressed both parents and educators. Catherine's mother had moved temporarily into a guest cottage on the estate during the worst of the treatment, providing practical support and emotional stability for the entire family. Her presence had been invaluable in maintaining household routines and offering the children a constant source of comfort when their parents were dealing with medical appointments and treatment side effects. The financial planning required for extended medical care and reduced royal income had been complex but manageable. The family's financial advisors had worked closely with palace administrators to ensure that medical expenses were covered while maintaining the household staff and security arrangements necessary for their unique circumstances. The experience had reinforced their appreciation for financial stability and the privilege of accessing excellent medical care. Public opinion polling showed that Catherine's approval ratings had reached new heights during her health crisis, with people expressing admiration for her courage and authenticity in sharing such a personal struggle. The numbers reflected genuine affection rather than mere sympathy, suggesting that her openness about vulnerability had actually strengthened her connection with the public. The relationship with extended family members had been tested and strengthened through the crisis. Some relatives had stepped up to provide support that went beyond duty, while others had struggled to know how to help. Catherine and William had learned to accept assistance gracefully while maintaining independence in their decision-making about treatment and family priorities. planning for the future now included considerations that hadn't existed before the diagnosis. Family conversations about health monitoring, lifestyle changes, and long-term goals had taken on new urgency and meaning. Catherine was determined to model healthy living and stress management for her children while pursuing her royal duties with renewed purpose and energy. The medical team had developed a long-term monitoring plan that would require regular checkups and ongoing vigilance for years to come. Catherine had accepted this new reality while refusing to let it dominate her thoughts or limit her ambitions. The balance between appropriate caution and hopeful planning required constant adjustment, but felt manageable with strong medical support. Catherine's faith had sustained her through the darkest moments and emerged stronger as a result of testing. The private prayers in palace chapels had been supplemented by formal services of thanksgiving for her recovery, attended by family and close friends who had supported them throughout the journey. Her relationship with spirituality had become more personal and less formal, focused on gratitude and service rather than obligation. The return to public duties was being planned carefully, with gradual increases in activity levels based on medical recommendations and personal energy. Catherine was eager to resume the work that brought her joy, but she was also committed to maintaining the life balance that had become essential for her family's well-being. The experience had taught her that saying no to certain requests was not just acceptable, but necessary. William's relationship with his father had been strengthened through the crisis, as King Charles had provided both official support and personal understanding based on his own health experiences. The conversations between father and son had moved beyond duty and protocol to genuine emotional connection and mutual support during family difficulties. The children were already showing signs of the empathy and resilience that would serve them well in their own future roles. They had learned to appreciate health, value family time, and understand that public service sometimes required personal sacrifice. Catherine and William were proud of how their children had handled the crisis, while remaining determined to protect their childhood as much as possible. As Catherine looked toward the future, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support they had received and the strength they had discovered as a family. The quiet goodbye they had said to their old life had been painful but necessary, leading them to a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Their public roles would continue, but with the wisdom that came from having faced genuine adversity together. The evening light was fading as Catherine walked back toward the house where her family was waiting. William was helping Louis with homework, while Charlotte practiced piano in the background. The sounds of ordinary family life felt like music after months of medical appointments and uncertain futures. Their quiet goodbye had led them not to an ending, but to a beginning of something stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more precious than what they had lost.